Morning, Glory, America. Good Friday to you. I hope you have a great weekend ahead. It's the longest weekend you ever get in February because it's leap year. You get an extra day. I hope you enjoy it on Sunday. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show this morning. Global stocks plummeted overnight, and the worst financial panic since 2008 continues. It's just a panic. It will run its course. Don't sell into a panic. I've always told my kids that. I still believe it. I think this will be the biggest V we've ever seen because all we needed to do was start to get ready for coronavirus, which we have done. And then there won't be the impact that people worry about. There will be some supply chain disruption. People will go back to work. There will be a bad first quarter, but it is not the end of the world. The virus is not Ebola. It is not Ebola. 80% of the people who get it, I hope you don't get it. I don't want it. But 80% of the people who get it just have a mild case, may stay home. Indeed, we want you to stay home. And then among the 20% that have severe cases, the vast majority of them survive as well. They may need hospitalization, isolation, but they will survive. It's people with compromised immune system and previously existing respiratory conditions who are at greatest risk from COVID, and they may be self-isolating already, but the market panic is just absurd. It's just way over the top, but you can't stop a panic. Just get out of the way. Mike Pence, the vice president, put in charge yesterday by the president of coronavirus, or Monday. What day did he get put in charge? Wednesday. Wednesday, the vice president got put in charge. I wrote about it on Monday, why he should be the guy. He went to CPAC, Conservative Political Action Conference, yesterday and said this about coronavirus. Cut number 12. This is the vice president doing his new job.
Before I begin, though, allow me to address an issue that I know is on the hearts and minds of people all across this country. The potential impact of the coronavirus here in America. President Donald Trump has no higher priority than the health, safety, and well-being of the American people. Last month, following word of the outbreak of the coronavirus in China, President Trump took unprecedented action to protect the health of Americans. He declared a public health emergency. We suspended travel to the United States from China. We initiated quarantine efforts for American citizens returning and established a White House coronavirus task force, which has literally met every single day to protect the American people. As of today, we have 15 cases of coronavirus that have been detected in the United States, with only one new case detected in the last 2 weeks. There's another 45 cases that have been diagnosed among Americans who've been repatriated from China. And while one American is hospitalized, thankfully all the patients have been treated and are doing well. And while the risk to the American public remains low, as the president said yesterday, we're ready. We're ready for anything. Yesterday, President Trump directed me to lead a whole-of-government approach to address the coronavirus in this country. And I promise you, we will continue to bring the full resources of the federal government to bear to protect the American people. And as the president also said, it's important to remember we're all in this together. This is not the time for partisanship. The American people expect us to work together. And I promise you, this president, this administration, is going to work with leaders in both parties. We'll work with leaders across this nation at the state and local level. And this president will always put the health and safety of America first.
This is why I wanted Pence in this job, because people have to cover him. He's very good at message delivery. He knows what he's doing, and people always return his phone calls. He's the vice freaking president of the United States. And so he will get it organized and get it done. I think he's already doing so. He went on Hannity's show last night. largest audience in cable land, and said this about the Democratic attack upon the president's preparedness plan, cut number 13.
Well, look, the president made it clear yesterday, we're all in this together. This is not the time for politics. And after the president asked me to lead the effort on the corona response from the White House, working with the task force that he established now a month and a half ago, working with state government officials and local and health officials, the president also directed me to reach out. I spoke to Speaker Pelosi. I spoke to Senator Schumer as well. I know. But look, the president said to me, look, I want you to reach out to the Republican and Democrat leadership because we want to push politics aside. We want to make sure ending travel, closing our borders to people coming in from China, establishing a quarantine process, setting up a task force. I mean, if the president hadn't taken those unprecedented steps,
they didn't seem to like it.
We'd be in a very different place today, Sean.
He did not like it. He went on to talk about the early decisions of President Trump. Mike Pence, cut number 14.
Well, look, and there was criticism last month, but when we first received word of the outbreak of the coronavirus, shortly after the first of the year, the health team came in. I was there in the Oval Office, and they said to the president, look, what we ought to do is we ought to end air travel. We ought to close our border, and we ought to establish a quarantining process for any American citizens that we allow back in. And they said, no president has ever done this before, but we're recommending out of an abundance of caution that you do it. And President Trump didn't hesitate for 1 second. He said, do it. And it was criticized by some at the time. But as I said, our health experts told me again yesterday when we huddled right after that press briefing for the first time. They said we would be in a very different place today if President Trump hadn't taken the decisive action that we had. And today, we haven't had a new case for the last 2 weeks until the word that reached the public in the last 24 hours. We've had 15 cases in this country, and people are being treated and doing well. One is still in the hospital. But the other 45 cases are all American citizens that we brought back home, went through a quarantining process. We're monitoring them. So I take my hat off to the president's leadership, as well as to Secretary Azar, the team at CDC, Homeland Security. This has been a whole of government approach, but when the president tapped me to lead the White House effort on this, I think it just demonstrated again to the public the seriousness that the president's placed on this. He's telling us to lean into this effort out of an abundance of caution because he has no higher priority than the health and safety of the American people.
Good. Pence is great at this. One more Pence cut from Hannity last night, cut 16 on the risk.
The risk of the spread of the coronavirus in the United States of America remains low. That's according to all of our experts, and it's a direct result of the unprecedented action that President Trump took last month when he closed our border to Chinese individuals coming into the country and also established a quarantining effort. Our White House coronavirus task force has literally been meeting every day for the last 6 weeks. And the American people can be confident that we're going to bring, at the president's direction, the full resources of the federal government to bear to protect the people of this country. That being said, during this time of year, it's always a good idea to engage in best practices, and people can go to cdc.gov to get the latest information on not only this virus, but how they can best see to the health of their family and their communities.
I just think Mike Pence is terrific at this. And I hope he's on next week with me. I hope he goes on every show in America, goes on The View, just says the same stuff. Prepare, don't panic. The markets, don't sell into a panic, people. It will bounce right back. Next week, it'll be fine. But in the meantime, Joe Biden is not going to be fine. The latest South Carolina poll from the Post and Courier. That's a big newspaper down there. Joe Biden's lead is down to 4. Now, 2 other polls say he's got double-digit leads, Emerson and Monmouth, but Post and Courier is the South Carolina poll that you look to, like you look to the Iowa poll out of the Des Moines Register, which didn't happen this year. The poll that matters has got Biden at +4. Ouch. Stay tuned. More coming up after the break on this, The Hugh Hewitt Show. Good morning, America. It's a Friday. Always happy on a Friday. It's the Hillsale Dialogue Day, and I am not prone to panic. I'm prone to being upbeat. I know the panic will end in the stock market. I know that. It'll be a V. It'll bounce back up, never sell into a panic. But yesterday I gave a speech on behalf of, for a group of wonderful ladies, probably 400 ladies. A few guys were there. And one of them came out, I'll just call her Donna, gave me the most wonderful letter. It's in my hand right here. And here I hold my formerly lukewarm coffee because she also gave me a gift. She gave me this gift, the coffee warmer. Make life a little bit warmer by Vobaga. I think it's by Vobaga. I'm not quite sure who it's by, but it's very effective. And the letter she gave me tells me that she had to undergo chemo from September of 2018 to June of 2019. That's a long time. And that the 3 hours of this radio show, she couldn't have been listening live, so she must be a member of the universe, whatever it is. I've been continuously inspired by your knowledge, political acumen, variety of outstanding guest interviews, stories of the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, which is not surprising. Generalissimo? Now that surprises me. He hadn't been here much of that time. I mean, we're talking about 10 months. He might have been here 3 or 4 times. Trump's tweedly tweets, baby boomer era music, and your overall great sense of humor. I mean, this was just wonderful to receive this letter. What your broadcast did to get me through those long days of depressing cancer treatment was a total blessing that opened up a whole world to me. Now I can tell everybody I can how important it is to listen to your show. Well, Donna, God bless you. I'm glad you're in recovery. Cancer can be kicked. Many of you people are out there going through it. You're actually the people who have to worry the most about coronavirus because you got compromised immune system. Just stay indoors and be fine, and you will be fine. Don also said, love your Christian worldview. Well, that's just my worldview because it's true. You get your good Catholic education, learn the Baltimore Catechism, know, love, and serve God. That's why we're here. That's why I tell you about, for example, in Lent, food for the poor. Now, my buddy Tradup, grumpy old Tom Tradup, the curmudgeon, in-house curmudgeon that we made fun of yesterday. He didn't even hear it because it's CPAC. I got to do it every day. But he also took his lovely wife, Lori, with him to Guatemala this year. And don't you know that curmudgeon Tom sent us some tape of Lori talking about Guatemala? Listen to this as she talks about how hopeful and generous the desperately poor people of Guatemala were to the Food for the Poor team that included Lori Tradup.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway was the hospitality that was shown to us. The very first person I met was a woman named Josephina who kind of served as a host in the community. And she instantly took hold of my hand and my elbow. I think she was really worried I wasn't going to be able to make it down that rocky path. And she walked me down to meet her neighbor. She was kind of a touch point within the community. She just kept being nearby and smiling and hugging and being so warm. And she and her children were dispensing chairs out for each of us to sit in. And just to think about, in their little, they were giving to us. And it just made me realize that in our much, we can do more.
In our much, we can do more. Lori is eloquent. Tom is not, but Lori is eloquent. Food for the poor. You can do more than you are doing at HughHewitt.com. Each generous donation provides life-saving food and clean water to the desperately poor families of Guatemala. Your gift can literally save lives today. It's the almsgiving that is required in Lent. Just go to HughHewitt.com, whether it's $10 or $100 or $1,000 or more. Click on the Save Starving Families banner because they are indeed starving. Or call Food for the Poor at 855-359-4673. It's 855-359-HOPE. It is, in fact, the world's most fragile communities, like the most fragile medical people who have to worry about this virus. It will adapt. The world always adapts to viruses. But in the meantime, it's poor, desperate, no health care places that have to worry about the virus. They shouldn't have to worry about clean water and food at the same time. Help them by helping Food for the Poor. By the way, speaking of other people, some people are benefiting in the virus, some people who want to buy homes. I told you I'd never seen it before. The 10-year Treasury is at 1.3%. It is the best time in the world ever to go to andrewandtodd.com and buy a house. That's the one part of the economy that, like 9 months after the New York City blackout, there were a lot of babies. Well, 1 month after this coronavirus, there are going to be a lot of new home buyers because the interest rates are extraordinary. 888-888-1172 to talk to Andrew and Todd, 888-888-1172, or go to andrewandtodd.com, then come right back here. Sonny Bunch is joining us because the weekend is upon us. The movies next on The Hugh Hewitt Show. That would be Sonny Bunch. America, hi, I'm Hugh Hewitt. Sonny Bunch is the official movie critic of the Hugh Hewitt Show. He is also the genius behind rebellermedia.com, which you can join if you're a movie type. Rebellermedia.com. Use the code Hugh, which of course I was not given to use, and you'll get 15% off. You can also follow Sonny Bunch on Twitter at Sonny Bunch. He's asking for a ridiculous number of airline miles to do a podcast for us. We will negotiate today. Hello, Sonny.
Hey, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good. I'm panic free. I will go to a theater if there's anything worth seeing. I don't care about the coronavirus, but is there anything, I can continue binge watching Peaky Blinders or go to the theater. Can I see anything?
Yeah, it is interesting. Just since you mentioned the coronavirus, it's funny. I get all of my news now through the Hollywood trades, right? Like this is how I spend my morning is essentially aggregating Hollywood news for the top section of rebellermedia.com and putting together, all the day's most interesting stuff, right? So reading about the coronavirus through the lens of Hollywood has been kind of fascinating.
Oh, interesting.
It's entirely a question of like what it means for box office, right? Like that's the only thing that matters.
Or it can't be good news in China, right?
No, I mean it is totally destroyed the Chinese box office. So if you look at the year-to-year box office totals for the last 6 weeks or 4 weeks or so, there was a story in one of the trades, Variety or the Hollywood Reporter or someplace, that looked at like the middle of January to the middle of February, that like 4-week stretch. And last year the box office was something like $1.3 billion for that period of time. And this year it is like $3.5 million or something like that. I mean, it's almost a factor of 500.
Wow.
The decline. Because the theaters are just straight up closed. They have the Chinese have just closed the theaters. You are not allowed to go to the theaters anymore, and it's wreaking havoc not only with domestic Chinese box office. But it's also really messing with the rest of the world because everybody wants to release all their movies at the same time, right? They want to release in China and in America and in England, all in about the same 1 week span.
You're telling me Sonic the Hedgehog did not do well in Beijing?
So Sonic the Hedgehog is not going to open in China. Probably is what it comes down to. I mean, like they're getting to the point where
no wonder markets are crashing.
Yeah, it's the box office it's bringing the whole world economy down. I mean, the estimates are staggering, but I think right now the best guess is that it will cost the world global box office disease between $2 and $4 billion.
Because it takes about 8 weeks for this thing to go through its first passage. Hopefully it doesn't come back a second time around. Most flus don't, but some do. Most coronaviruses don't, but some do. So it'll be done in a couple of months. But in the meantime, does Hollywood change its release schedule? Are they backing everything up?
Well, not domestically. Everything is still, in theory, on the same release plan. They're not yet pulling things from domestic release to make sure they match up with foreign releases. But it's hard to say that will continue for sure. I mean, it would be very, very unusual for America to close theaters in the way that China and Iran and other kind of authoritarian regimes have closed their theaters. There would have to be some sort of truly remarkable disease, thing going on here in the States for that to happen. I don't see that happening. But that said, if the foreign markets stay closed long enough, eventually Hollywood is going to have to try to figure out what they want to do. If they want to try to keep the same release schedule here in the States as they have so far. I think we'll be fine in terms of I don't think you're gonna miss out on any of the great movies that you've wanted to watch.
Mulan is Mulan coming out this weekend?
No, Mulan is not this weekend.
Oh,
Mulan's in a few weeks.
Is there anything to go see?
Well, Hugh, I know you're not a big horror guy.
I'm not.
I know you're not a big horror guy, but The Invisible Man is the big.
No
the big
freaking way. No, I saw the trailer. I got creeped out with the trailer. It's domestic violence combined with horror.
Yeah, it's The Invisible Man for the Me Too era. Elizabeth Moss, who people will remember from The Handmaid's Tale and Mad Men,
or not.
She is a. Well, come on, Mad Men was great.
I never saw Mad Men, but go ahead.
Oh, Mad Men is great. I mean, you're not alone. That show was watched by 1 million people, so it's very much a less popular phenomenon than some in the media would have you believe, but it was good. Elizabeth Moss stars as a abused wife who goes on the run, and after she escapes her husband, she finds out that he killed himself.
Now, and Sonny, let's pause here. I covered domestic violence on air for 20 years and on TV for the 10 when I was with PBS. How can anyone come up with a plot line that tries to make domestic violence into a thing to be exploited by an invisible man? I mean, it's just, who greenlit this picture?
Well, Hugh, I mean, this is the thing about exploitation and about horror, right, is that it allows us to talk about difficult subjects in a slightly fantastic or unrealistic way in order to, get across the point of how horrifying this sort of thing is, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that it is an inappropriate subject to discuss. I think it is. I think it's it's not a comedy. Hugh. I think if there are ways that you could handle this, it would be far more inappropriate than this.
Sure. It's like what? Remember Proud Mary? I hated that because of the way they treated the mentally disabled. But I'm sure they treat it effectively. I just can't imagine who's going to see this. Who wants to see a horror movie about domestic violence?
Well, it is. I have seen it. I saw it last night. It is very scary. It is very tense. Director Lee Winnell does a good job of kind of creating tension out of the idea that one cannot be safe in one's own home, or that one cannot ever be safe if you cannot truly see the thing that is stalking you and coming after you. It's interesting what he does with this movie. And like I said, it's kind of a reboot update for the Me Too era, right? It's got the issue here is not so much domestic violence, but what happens when people don't believe domestic violence survivors, right? When they try to say, well, this couldn't possibly be happening. You must be imagining this. This isn't real. It's scary. It's scary, and it kind of reflects our time, right? It's like a little bit timely. I liked it. I didn't love it. It's a little long. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, Hugh. I don't think you or the.
I ain't going to that. Is there anything else? I don't want to see it. I already saw Call of the Wild, but you spoiled for me. I thought the dog was great.
You thought the dog was great. The fake dog didn't bother you?
No, not in the least. He was a great dog.
Yeah,
Buck.
Yeah,
I thought Buck was dead a couple of times.
He was a good boy. That Buck.
And I thought Harrison Ford did fine too. It was a fine movie.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. It's fine.
It's fine.
There is a movie out in limited release right now called Guns Akimbo that I like. But it will be slightly hard for most people to track down.
Guns Akimbo?
Guns, Guns, Akimbo, Akimbo. It basically is a video game movie that's not based on a video game. The plot of it is pretty simple. A guy who spends all of his time online finds out about a social media network where people kill each other for sport for everyone to watch, and starts yelling at the people on the social media account, telling them they're bad and awful.
Yeah, okay, you're not selling me on this. I got to ask you one question before we run out of time. Bob Iger quit. Is that because of the China? Did he just say, "Oh gosh, I'm not going to go through life with the Chinese theaters closed"? Do you think that had a factor here?
Maybe. I mean, look, Bob Iger. So if you've listened to Bob Iger's, or if you've read Bob Iger's memoir, I listen to it because I listen to audiobooks now because I'm too lazy to read. He says in his memoir that came out last year that he had been planning on stepping down in 2020 ahead of the expiration of his contract in 2021. So this was planned to a certain extent
before the coronavirus showed up.
Before the coronavirus showed up. So he was going to do this for a while. That he is doing it now, as opposed to like 6 months from now, is probably a little bit of a surprise. But I don't think he is. I don't think this was not something that came out of the blue, right? This is not something that is necessarily related to the coronavirus.
No, I'm just saying it's awfully convenient. It's awfully good timing if you don't want to deal with the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald that is the Chinese movie theater business. But Sonny Bunch, we will go to Rebeller Media and see what you have to say about movies I'm not going to see. Someday you'll see Peaky Blinders and we can talk about it. And we will negotiate off air about your airline miles outrageous demands to start a podcast, which the world wants. The world needs you, Sonny.
Yeah, we need to make sure we have the financials correct on that one.
Generalissimo is in charge.
I fly a lot.
You fly a lot. Generalissimo is in charge of the airline miles around here, and he's pretty absolutely skimpy on this. But good luck with that. America, let me turn from movies to the good side of the world. Honor Bound Coffee. See this? It's an empty bag because we're using our Honor Bound coffee. People said, do you use it? Yes, look at that. It's an empty bag. Honor Bound Coffee has got 4 great grinds, espresso, drip, French press, and bean, and 4 different roasts. And all of the profits, 100% of the profits, go to support military families, beginning with the Injured Marine Semper Fi Fund. Pete and Seth Talbot put this together. They talked to me. They came and saw me about it. It's on their heart. They want to make sure that they bless the people that protect this country. And I said, whatever I can do to help, I will help. HonorBoundCoffee.com. And it begins by using the product. It begins by subscribing. So go subscribe and never buy coffee again. If you're going to be working the polls all weekend long tomorrow in South Carolina, go get some Honor Bound coffee to take with you there. Republicans will be voting in the Democratic primary. Make sure to vote for Bernie Sanders. Get him over the top. We need to have that showdown. We need to make a choice. We cannot allow the illusion that socialism is a viable option to grow and sprout everywhere. It needs to be repudiated publicly. Please go and vote for Bernie Sanders. He's not the easiest to beat. He may be the hardest to beat, but he's got to be beaten because his ideology is just terrible. Speaking of helping military families, the people who make Honor Bound Coffee also got started with ReliefFactor.com. If you're watching on Univision, which you should be doing, you should be a member of the Universe. You will see me holding up the ReliefFactor.com bag. You will see me open it. You will see me take out a packet. You will see me open that packet. And because of Donna, my previously lukewarm coffee is now hot. And I will take it. There it goes down better when the coffee isn't stone cold. Thank you, Donna, and thank you, ReliefFactor.com. Ready for a long weekend, a long run, a long trundle, as I like to say, because of Icarian, Curcumin, Resveratrol, Omega, the 4 natural supplements that make up ReliefFactor.com. The first of the 3 times I'll remind you today, go and get it. Tarzana Joe is next, America, and then an update on the polling out of South Carolina. We'll look at the markets abroad. Be another tough day on Wall Street here, but do not panic. All will be well. Joined now by Tarzana Joe, the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. You know, this time of year, confession is good for the soul. And so I must confess.
Uh-oh.
Have you ever watched and wondered when election games get played in the back rooms and the boardrooms, how the sausages get made? When you tune into debating out there on your TV screens, you can look, but you won't see me. I'm the guy behind the scenes. I ride their campaign buses, take my meals in greasy diners, while I scribble on some napkins A.B. Klobuchar's one-liners. I'm the guy who preps Joe Biden when he speaks to face the nation. I live my life on coffee and complete exasperation. I'm the surrogate for Steyer. I can imitate his frown. When I stand in for Mike Bloomberg, well, I do that sitting down. I keep reminding Mayor Pete to practice what he preaches, then send him home to memorize Barack Obama's speeches. I do legal briefs with Sanders, because he isn't an attorney. Working with him's easy. All you do is say, yes, Bernie. When I got the gig with Warren, then I really had it made. I just stand and let her scold me like I was in second grade. You may say my job is easy, but I'll tell you that's a slander. I've made it my profession teaching people how to pander. So if you watch them arguing and figure, what a shame, I think you ought to recognize that I'm the guy to blame. This one's on me. By Tarzana Joe.
That's Ash Wednesday week. It's good to get your confessing done early.
Yes, my soul is suddenly lighter.
Now, there aren't a lot of demand for Lenten poems, are there?
I have a St. Patrick's poem.
Okay, well, that's good. That happens in Lent, but I mean, people aren't asking.
You said that last week, and boom, I got a request for a St. Patrick's poem.
Well, people are going to have to make that. There is an annual tradition among many places, like a long time ago law firm, the O'Neill firm. They always have a St. Patrick's Day. Someone wants to stand up and give some verse. They just go to Tarzana Joe first.
There, yes. I'm trying to figure out what to rhyme with corned beef.
Tarzana Joe at Reagan.com for all your poetry needs. And Tarzana, will today's confessional be posted at TarzanaJoe.com?
It will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Should have said chief. Corned beef and chief. I like Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know. Let me do the polling for you from Real Clear Politics. In the Utah Democratic primary, Bernie Sanders is up by 9. In the Democratic presidential race, Sanders at 30. It's a Fox News poll. Sanders 31, Biden 18. Excuse me. Biden 18, Bloomberg 16, Warren 10, Buttigieg 12, Klobuchar 5. Tom Steyer, billions. 2%. That makes me happy. Bernie's running away with it nationally, but is he doing so in South Carolina? Depends on what you read. According to Emerson and Monmouth, he's ahead by close to 20 points in South Carolina. But then the Post and Courier, which is really the paper of record down there, comes in and it shows that Biden's up by 4. And then in Colorado, Magellan, which is a Republican firm, finds Sanders is up by 12. I just think if you look down all the Super Tuesday races, Bernie's going to be in a delegate lead situation come Wednesday morning. But it ain't over till they vote. Joe was out yesterday. I've got to do my Joe Biden reminder for all of you in South Carolina. I want the Republicans to know what you're voting for. You got to vote for Bernie because we can't listen to Joe for a year.
Let me tell you, I think I'm more in step with the lingo than any of them. Come on, man. Come on. Play the radio. Make sure make sure you have the record player on at night. The phone.
Iran has 14 million people.
You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over. If you like what you see, help out. If not, vote for the other by. I'm the guy that came back after meeting with Deng Xiaoping and making the case that I believe China would join if we put pressure on them. Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and entered into discussions about apartheid. I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robbins Island.
As I walked down in the streets of Soweto, as I walked out in Soweto one day, I spied a great man who came towards me smiling.
Do you know how far Soweto is from Robben Island?
I know, it's ridiculous. It's
like
completely
900
nuts.
miles.
It's completely nuts. Okay, I got to go on. Joe Biden.
Why am I stopping? No one else stops.
You're not going to stop unless the Republicans vote for Bernie Sanders.
Sometimes I wake up and I think it's 1920.
I wish it was 1920, Joe.
Who in God's name needs 100 rounds and a bullet and a clip with a gun you have?
Just Joe Biden. And people laugh every time I run through it. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cuts of Joe Biden in our Hall of Fame Joe Biden cuts. And I must admit, as a talk show host, there is a certain attraction to having Joe in the race through November. It's not hard radio. What did Joe do today? Did I miss something on my...
Yeah, cut one.
Oh, cut one. Joe Biden and... he was being handsy.
If someone in this room got up, took off all her clothes and walked out the door, no man has the right to touch her. 0. She can be arrested for indecent exposure.
Wait, that's going to go on my board. Play that again.
This is Handsy Joe talking.
Cut number 1.
If someone in this room got up, took off all her clothes and walked out the door, no man has the right to touch her. 0. She can be arrested for
What?
Why?
Why? Who, what, why, where, and when? All right, you vote for Joe Biden, South Carolina. You go right ahead. Who, what, why, where, and when? The acting Secretary of the Navy joins me next. We got to get serious. We got to get away from Joe Biden. They got a budget cut sprung on him. We'll talk about it next on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning, Glory America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greeting to my 400 affiliates around the globe, mostly in the United States, but wherever you are listening via the Universe or HughHewitt.com or the YouTube channel. Great to have you with us. Joined, as I am always pleased to say, by Acting Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Modly. Acting Secretary Modly, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I'm great, Mr. Secretary. Challenging times in the Navy. I want to start with the USNI News story this morning. Coronavirus concerns prompt PAC fleet to impose a 14-day gap between port visits. I think that's a great idea. How did that develop, and how long do you think that will be in place for?
Well, I think we're monitoring this very, very closely, Hugh. We've been actually looking at this for several weeks now. I know it's sort of come out in the news lately that we're taking these actions, but we've been looking at this for a very long time, and we're going to keep whatever actions and restrictions in place as long as we feel that there may be some risk to our sailors. So we're going to continue to do this and monitor it closely.
Now, of course, ships make port calls not just for the benefit of the morale of the sailors, but also because they need to take on supplies, et cetera. Can everybody handle this very easily?
Oh, I think we are prepared to deal with this for a while, and as it evolves, we'll come up with different contingencies in terms of how we might get supplies out to the ships.
It was also the case in the 1918-1920 pandemic that the Surgeon General of the military and the various branches was pretty much greeted with silence when they went to the brass of the various services. I expect you'll tell me it's 180 degrees reverse from that now.
No, this has been a very open, transparent process within the Pentagon itself. I've been in briefings on this for at least 5 weeks now. So, and all the senior political leadership are in the meetings, as well as all the senior service chiefs and the Surgeon Generals. And so this has been a very collaborative effort, not just within the Pentagon, but throughout the interagency as well.
I just got to have you underscore for the civilian population like me. This is an amazing difficulty for deployment schedules, for military families, for everything. If you start moving around deployments as a result of coronavirus, everything gets moved. It's just really one of those domino sets that just keeps going on forever.
It is true, and personal anecdote, my son is an F-16 pilot in Korea right now. His wife just moved there, and I've been on the phone with him the last couple of days trying to figure out, what he should be doing. He was supposed to be coming to the U.S. in a couple of weeks to do some advanced training in Nevada, and not really sure whether or not that's going to happen. But we have the ability to adjust to these things, and we have a pretty good command and control system in the U.S. military, and we're able to take action pretty quickly. So obviously, people are concerned and a little uncertain about what's next, but we have the ability to adapt as this thing does.
I'm sure your daughter-in-law is like every mill spouse I know, completely able to deal with anything that comes her way. And thanks to your son and your family for their service as well. Now, Secretary Modly, let's talk about this House Armed Services Committee hearing. Came out of the blue for me. I was not expecting Secretary Esper to cut the Navy's shipbuilding budget. There are reports that it was a surprise to the Navy as well. How do you answer that?
Well, there are two phases to this, Hugh. There was the normal budget process that we went through where we as a Department of the Navy, made some very serious choices that traded off readiness for new shipbuilding. And I'd hinted with you about this in the past that, my position on this is we can't put our sailors and Marines out on platforms that aren't safe and aren't ready. So that was a trade we made. And as you know, we've been digging ourselves out of a really bad readiness hole that evolved over the last several years of the last administration, and so we're pulling our way out of that, and so we had to make some trades in that regard. We also traded off on lethality and increased the number of missiles and ammunition and things like that to get out there onto our ships and for our Marines. At the end game, when we get to the end game of this budget process, that's when things, final trades are being made, and that's when the Secretary of Defense really has to make those calls. So there were some decisions at the end game to include reprogrammings that were done to fund the border wall, which, we don't really get to negotiate on that. Those are sort of presented to us. We don't get a veto, and, these are choices that are very hard for the Secretary of Defense to make as well, and it's a tough position for him to be in, but, that's why he's in the seat. So we just, of course, it impacts our path to a larger fleet in certain areas, but it does it for a year, and as I said yesterday in my testimony, it just arrests our trajectory. It doesn't stop it, and so we're continuing down that path. It's my responsibility to get a plan in terms of how we can get to 355 ships within a relevant time frame, and for me, that's 10 years, and I've talked to you about this before. I'm still going to do that, and then we're going to have to see how we fund it.
Now, I personally do not believe Congress will go along. I think there's nothing they can do about reprogramming, but they can increase the top line and they can mandate that it be spent on ships. I am curious if you run two different shipbuilding scenarios, one where Congress actually imposes its will on the department and says you will build these ships, and one where you live under Secretary Esper's proposed budget. Do you run two different shipbuilding scenarios?
Well, yeah, I mean that's up to the Congress to decide what they want to tell us to do. My job is just to lay out some options for the Secretary of Defense, and that's what we're doing right now. We're sort of, this 21 budget was pretty much baked by the time we finished our force structure assessment, this new force structure assessment. So everything that force structure assessment is going to inform, and as well as whatever plan we decide on for the next 10 years, that's going to come out and be impacted in the FY22, and we're starting that work right now.
Now, there is another story out that the budget as proposed would actually have President Trump's fleet at 12 ships fewer than President Obama's 30-year shipbuilding plan that was introduced in 2016. I can't imagine the president, when he sees that the DOD is proposing a shipbuilding of a fleet that is smaller than President Obama's, will be indifferent to that news.
No, and I'm not either. That is not the path or the trajectory that I want us to be on either. But this is sort of people build a projection based on what happens in 1 year, and that's not always the most accurate thing to do. Right now we're funded with a top line that's fairly flat or declining based on, if you look at inflation adjusted. That can fund a fleet of about 305 ships, and that is lower than what President Obama's force structure was driving towards. However, they weren't anywhere near that either. I mean, when this administration came in, we only had 275 ships. So we are definitely a larger fleet than any fleet that existed when President Obama was in office. His plan had us driving towards a bigger fleet, but his number was like 320. We're trying to drive towards something that I call 355 plus, which is bigger than 355 based on the force structure assessment that was done in 2016. Additional platforms, new platforms that have not been designed or in production yet, and that'll be informed by some of the new warfighting concepts that the Navy and Marine Corps are looking at together. But that's the path that I want us to be on. And obviously at the end of the day, we're going to need to look deep inside our own budget line, and I've started an internal review to try and free up some capital to do that from our own budget, because I'm not under any illusion that we're the most efficient organization in the world. I know there's money to be found in how we do things, but at the same time, there is a big math problem, and we need to try and get more top line, and any support we can get for that, we're obviously welcoming it.
When you say we need more top line, I want to translate that for the Steelers fans. That means you need a bigger, robust Navy budget specific to the Navy, to the fleet, to the Marine Corps and the Navy, coming from Congress, mandated there, which I think you'll get. And you also need the Congress, I think, to deal specifically with the replacement of the Ohio-class ballistic submarine. And I saw the Secretary say, look, the Air Force has got to pay for bombers and for missiles, and the Navy's has got to pay for its submarine. That's true, but it's up to the Congress to actually take a serious look at the triad and fund it.
I have no argument. That is one of the biggest pressurizing things on our budget right now is the Columbia-class submarine. It's our most important priority, and yet it's going to be taking up 25 to 30% of our shipbuilding budget from now, until the next 20 years. And so when you have that, and it's a once in every 40-year capitalization, it really squeezes every other opportunity you have to grow every other part of your fleet substantially. So that is the biggest dilemma we have right now. We're looking for solutions to try and solve that. There's some ideas floating around that I'm looking at with our comptroller to see if we can. There are a lot of unexpired and unobligated dollars that at the end of the year, if we don't spend them, they just go back to the Treasury, or that not even Treasury, they're just never spent. And so if there's a way that we can sort of plow that back into shipbuilding or directly into the submarine budget for the Columbia, that would go a long, long way. But when we're talking, we're really only talking about 1 to 2% more of the overall DoD top line, in my estimation, for us to get on this path and to get this done in 10 years. So it's a ton of money, obviously, but the top line's pretty big as well. And so I think if we can get that done, we have an opportunity to move out on this.
Well, the Congress has to get serious. I mean, they do. I want to ask you in our remaining moments about two specific classes, the Flight 3 DDG and the FFGX. Those are both sort of backbones of the fleet expansion, correct?
Yes.
Are they both on time and under budget?
Well, the FFGX we have not awarded yet. I'm very, very excited about that ship, though I will tell you. And this has been a very innovative approach to buying that ship. The Congress agreed to allow us to look at foreign designs, and principally because we wanted to buy a ship that's already proven, that's been out there and operating. That cuts almost 3 years off the acquisition process for a ship, and also, once you get the ship in place, the testing is reduced significantly because there's so many of these systems that have already been proven. So we're going to be awarding that here sometime this year. I'm very excited about that platform because it's almost going to be as capable as some of our Flight 2 DDGs, and hopefully at half the price. And that's the thing that we really have to be driving towards. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but when we built the 600-ship Navy under President Reagan, in real dollars, the average cost of those ships was about $1 billion apiece. Today, our current fleet of 295 ships, the average cost of a ship in our fleet in real dollars is $2 billion. We have to figure out a way to drive that cost curve down if we're going to build a bigger fleet, because there's no conceivable way that I can increase the size of the fleet by 30% and ask for 30% more top line.
No, of course not. But you can. I mean, people need to understand the FFGX. The lethality of that ship will be so much more than the old guided missile frigate, right? With hypersonics, it's just a killer.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to have a large number of missile tubes and a very, very sophisticated radar, because we're leveraging off the Aegis radar system for this. So it's going to be a fantastic piece of machinery. In addition to that, the electrical power generation on these ships, in terms of the requirements we put out there, are going to allow this ship to really adopt a lot of new weapon systems, to include directed energy and other things as the fleet grows.
Well, Secretary Modly, the sooner you make that announcement, the sooner people like me, civilians who don't know much, will say, okay, they're finally getting it together. Because I know the FFGX is a key to this expansion of the fleet, like the Flight 3 DDG, the replacement destroyer. We know what the keys are. We just don't see them announcement of award of contract.
Well, stay tuned. It's coming soon. So
being this spring?
Well, right now we have it in the budget to award this ship this year. The plan was to try and do it in the latter part of this year. I've asked our Assistant Secretary for RD&A to try and accelerate that earlier, and he's looking into the possibilities for doing that. But obviously, we have acquisition rules, and we want to make sure that we do this in the proper way.
Of course, but do you think it would be wise, I do, if Congress were to provide immunity to challenges on the acquisition of these ships? In other words, we see that the Cloud contract is being challenged. That was inevitable given how big it is and the people that are involved. But you're looking hard at these 4 different ships, whichever one you pick, or the 2 different ships. If the Congress gives immunity to the decision that you make, then we'd cut time off the acquisition, wouldn't we?
Well, I don't know if that's true or not, Hugh, and that's really not for me to say. I mean, that's not really my business to tell the Congress what they should do. But we have to follow the rules that are in place. We are following the rules that are in place. I don't think that if we have a protest on this, it's going to really delay us that significantly. I think we've done a really, really good job on making sure this has been a fair and open competition, and we'll see what happens when it's awarded.
Last question, Mr. Secretary. If they increase the top line, what do they need to get to 355 in 10 years? Seriously, what's the number they need to add to the Navy?
The plan that I'm looking at right now, and this has not been pressure tested, but in order for us to get to 355 within 10 years, it's going to require about $120 billion more above our current top line, which is that's assuming a flat top line. So that delta, spread over 10 years, if we start ramping up $5 to $7 billion more than, and our budget this year was $207 billion, is the Navy and Marine Corps budget.
All right.
If we had another, 5% on top of what we have right now,
we could
definitely get that. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming back. Always appreciated.
Okay, thanks very much, Hugh.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Here's the conclusion of my interview with Acting Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Modly. I want to ask you in our remaining moments about two specific classes, the Flight 3 DDG and the FFGX. Those are both sort of backbones of the fleet expansion, correct?
Yes.
Are they both on time and under budget?
Well, the FFGX we have not awarded yet. I'm very, very excited about that ship, though, I will tell you. And this has been a very innovative approach to buying that ship. The Congress agreed to allow us to look at foreign designs, and principally because we wanted to buy a ship that's already proven, that's been out there and operating. That cuts almost 3 years off the acquisition process for a ship, and also, once you get the ship in place, the testing is reduced significantly because there's so many of these systems that have already been proven. So we're going to be awarding that here sometime this year. I'm very excited about that platform because it's almost going to be as capable as some of our Flight 2 DDGs, and hopefully at half the price. And that's the thing that we really have to be driving towards. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but when we built the 600-ship Navy under President Reagan, in real dollars, the average cost of those ships was about $1 billion apiece. Today, our current fleet of 295 ships, the average cost of a ship in our fleet in real dollars is $2 billion. We have to figure out a way to drive that cost curve down if we're going to build a bigger fleet, because there's no conceivable way that I can increase the size of the fleet by 30% and ask for 30% more top line.
No, of course not. But you can. I mean, people need to understand the FFGX. The lethality of that ship will be so much more than the old guided missile frigate, right? With hypersonics, it's just a killer.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to have a large number of missile tubes and a very, very sophisticated radar, because we're leveraging off the Aegis radar system for this. So it's going to be a fantastic piece of machinery. In addition to that, the electrical power generation on these ships, in terms of the requirements we put out there, are going to allow this ship to really adopt a lot of new weapon systems, to include directed energy and other things as the fleet grows.
Well, Secretary Modly, the sooner you make that announcement, the sooner people like me, civilians who don't know much, will say, okay, they're finally getting it together. Because I know the FFGX is a key to this expansion of the fleet, like the Flight 3 DDG, the replacement destroyer. We know what the keys are. We just don't see them announcement of award of contract.
Well, stay tuned. It's coming soon. So
being this spring?
Well, right now we have it in the budget to award this ship this year. The plan was to try and do it in the latter part of this year. I've asked our Assistant Secretary for RD&A to try and accelerate that earlier, and he's looking into the possibilities for doing that. But obviously, we have acquisition rules, and we want to make sure that we do this in the proper way.
Of course, but do you think it would be wise, I do, if Congress were to provide immunity to challenges on the acquisition of these ships? In other words, we see that the Cloud contract is being challenged. That was inevitable given how big it is and the people that are involved. But you're looking hard at these 4 different ships, whichever one you pick, or the 2 different ships. If the Congress gives immunity to the decision that you make, then we'd cut time off the acquisition, wouldn't we?
Well, I don't know if that's true or not, Hugh, and that's really not for me to say. I mean, that's not really my business to tell the Congress what they should do. But we have to follow the rules that are in place. We are following the rules that are in place. I don't think that if we have a protest on this, it's going to really delay us that significantly. I think we've done a really, really good job on making sure this has been a fair and open competition, and we'll see what happens when it's awarded.
Last question, Mr. Secretary. If they increase the top line, what do they need to get to 355 in 10 years? Seriously, what's the number they need to add to the Navy?
The plan that I'm looking at right now, and this has not been pressure tested, but in order for us to get to 355 within 10 years, it's going to require about $120 billion more above our current top line, which is that's assuming a flat top line. So that delta, spread over 10 years, if we start ramping up $5 to $7 billion more than, and our budget this year was $207 billion, is the Navy and Marine Corps budget.
All right.
If we had another, 5% on top of what we have right now,
that would do it.
Definitely get that. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming back. Always appreciated.
Okay, thanks very much, Hugh.
Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back. You're listening, of course, to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Head on over while you can to honorboundcoffee.com. That's the group that takes care of the military families that are always being disrupted, as Secretary Modly just discussed in personal terms. It's all across the globe, but support those families by drinking honorboundcoffee.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. You just heard Acting Secretary Modly. I am now joined by Admiral Stavridis, retired United States Navy. Admiral Stavridis, of course, was the Supreme Commander of NATO, Commander of Southern Command, frequent guest. I want to begin by saying, Admiral, in January, you and I talked about coronavirus, and we both bemoaned a lack of awareness and preparedness. 5 weeks later, sadly, we were right, but I'm glad to see everyone getting their act together now. Your reaction?
I think that's correct, up to the point of everyone getting their act together. I'm still seeing pockets globally where this is not being addressed sufficiently, places like Iran, parts of sub-Saharan Africa. But, hey, Hugh, you and I have seen this one and talked about it. This is all hands on deck, and it's going to require a global-level response, and we're all going to have to pull on these oars together. This is dangerous. I do not want to be an alarmist, and I don't think we've ever been alarmist about it. But let's face it, this is going to continue spreading, and it's going to require much more than just some basic quarantining in Hubei, China. This is big casino.
It is big casino. I want no one to panic. I think the markets are acting irrationally at this point. I do want people to understand that 80% of the people who get this will have a bad case of the flu, and that 20% will have serious respiratory problems. And of that 20%, 10% are likely to expire. Most of those people will have immunity-compromised systems, and most of them will have previous respiratory diseases. But it's going to be a worldwide flu epidemic that people have to take serious and isolate, stay home from work and stuff like that. But mostly I'm happy that Vice President Pence, who always gets his phone calls returned, is leading this effort. That's what they need to do in every country.
I completely agree. What should be happening is someone who has not only the ability to get phone calls returned, and I know you're saying that with your tongue in your cheek, but also has a deep knowledge of the mechanisms of government. That's what I like about the Pence appointment. Not only does he really get Washington, he's been a governor, he's been a congressman, he knows how to move money and resources, and that's what this is going to be about. Now, should he have around him the very top medical talent of this nation? Absolutely, and it seems to me that he does. So I think that's the all-star team that's going to go at this, and it's going to require not only quarantining, as we talked about, but accelerating a vaccine. And let's also recognize coronavirus comes in various flavors. Probably it's going to be here to stay, and I would predict by next year's flu season, we're all going to get a coronavirus shot.
Yep.
As part of what this is going to be going forward, and what has been thought of as cold and flu season is going to be cold, flu, and coronavirus season from here on out.
Well said.
We're going to get through this, but it's going to require top talent and a lot of energy, and it's got to be global. And
transparency. I want to just stress this. The Chinese did us no favor. I just talked with Sonny Bunch. The reason some companies are getting hit, like Apple, is supply line. Others, like movie theaters, they're just shut in China, and that's a lot of the international box office. They just did no one any favors. Iran is now the problem. I think China's actually become reasonably transparent about this, but Iran has not, and they are going to be isolated as a result.
Absolutely correct. And let's face it, this is piling on right after the elections in Iran. And so we've got a whole new wave of energy into the hardliners there who are going to take advantage of this, who are going to leverage it. They're going to play it to their people as a conspiracy theory that was generated in a Western biolab, which obviously it's not. Came out of China, and we can trace it right back to these live animal markets. At the end of the day, Iran will only hurt itself by the way it's going forward. It will become a case study in how not to deal with this.
All right, now I want to switch over to the Navy's budget because there was some alarming testimony this week before the House Armed Services Committee. I had Acting Secretary Modly on just now. Told me, look, if they want us to get to where the president wants to get, they got to give me $120 billion more over 10 years. Top line Navy budget, $120 billion, starting at 5 to 7 a year and accelerating. I don't think that's an unreasonable ask, but you got to ask. I don't know why the SecDef didn't ask. You don't get what you don't ask for in that town, right?
That's absolutely correct. And I have not parsed into the details of how much of this is going to be pulled out and going to, for example, the border wall, or what other mechanisms are there? Hey, let's face it, in Washington, there are always going to be last-minute plays by the administration to put money into things that the administration wants as opposed to what the department wants. On this one, I am obviously four square behind the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Mike Gilday, Acting Secretary of the Navy, Tom Modly, who I think, as I have said before, is doing an exceptional job across the board. And I think he's navigating difficult waters, if you'll permit me that slight pun. He's got to be responsive to the White House, to the OMB, to the top level in the executive branch. But he knows what's right for the Navy, and he'll continue to advocate for it.
What I found very interesting, we talked about the DDG-3 and the new frigate. He seemed to say they were advancing the decision on the frigate, and that would be good news in my view, because I think those are the two workhorses of fleet expansion. I know we need the Columbia class. We talked about that, but those two ships are where it happens. The administration wants a bigger Navy. If they want a bigger Navy, they should just move forward and make the decision. Do you think that the sea services have within the building now the information they need to make the selection?
I think they do. And it's pretty clear what we need. We need frigates because they're low cost, they're workhorses. You can put aviation assets on them. You could put manned helicopters, but you could also load them with unmanned. They have got reasonable capability for self-defense. You can package the whole thing and make a lot of them and make them quickly. And that was the experience with the Oliver Hazard Perry frigates, which got a lot of criticism, justly, on their lack of ability to be in a hard warfighting environment. And yet, if you really look at the trajectory of those FIG 7s, as we call them, FFG 7 was the whole number, Oliver Hazard Perry, the lead ship, they did marvelous for us across both the Cold War and into the global war on terror.
Well, $120 billion over 10 years, in addition to all the spending we're doing, is not that much for global security. That's why I'm astounded that the president, and I don't know that he knows it, I don't know that he's focused on this, he is behind the Obama ship deployment plan. I mean, way behind it.
I know. And let's face it, another cut. And by the way, Congress will have a role to play here, and I think Congress is going to add ships. But another one that astounds me is cutting one of the Virginia-class submarines. We absolutely need nuclear-powered submarines, attack submarines. Certainly we need Columbia, the ballistic missile submarine. We're going to get that. Everybody agrees on it. But in the future, and it makes me kind of sad to say this as a surface warfare officer and a destroyer commander throughout my career, but boy, those nuclear-powered, silent Virginia-class submarines are the coin of the realm. And we need 60-plus of those, and cutting one out of this budget is a significant mistake. Sounds small, but it's a mistake, both operationally and also in how it's going to be perceived. Watch for the Congress to restore.
You know, I know you avoid politics, Admiral, but I don't. And it seems to me just absurd that the Republican administration does not put the onus on the House Armed Services Committee, where the budget begins, to cut back a demand for more ships. Instead, they put the onus on themselves. I just will never get it. Let me close by asking you a very esoteric question. I asked it of Acting Secretary Modly as well. Would the Navy welcome immunity from contract award decisions? Because those do slow down. They're slowing down the cloud choice. I understand that. People are going to fight over that contract forever because it's billions and billions and billions and billions. But we need some ships. Do you think that the Navy would welcome in the defense legislation this year immunity from selection on the frigate?
I think that the Navy would welcome it tactically, strategically over time as taxpayers. You know, there's a balance that has to occur there. But we started this conversation talking about coronavirus and all hands on deck. I think getting our shipbuilding numbers up is an all-hands-deck evolution. I would take that tactical advantage in a limited year or two package.
That's it. I'm not saying do it for for every ship. I'm just saying these frigates do pack a lot of punch, right? They change the equation.
Indeed, they do. And again, look back on those Fig 7s and also think about how important it is to drive those numbers forward. We can afford to do this as a nation, and it is going to pay big dividends for us if we do it. And if we don't, we're going to rue the day as China zooms by us in ship numbers.
Admiral James Stavridis, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us this morning, Admiral. We'll post the audio of that over at HughHewitt.com. Quite the Navy. Let me remind you, if you've ever wanted to buy a house, this is the week to buy a house. AndrewandTodd.com. AndrewandTodd.com. I want you to go over because the 10-year Treasury is at 1.3%. 1.3%. 888-1172. Call Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian. Your mortgage won't be 1.3%, but what you will get is the absolute lowest home mortgage ever available in the United States. I bet you it's at about 3.3 for a 30-year mortgage by the end of next week. So don't miss this opportunity because markets, it doesn't look like the panic is spreading over here. The U.S. future is not so bad. It was bad overseas, but it always ends in the United States when people say, I think I can make some money now and go back into the market. So that home buying interest rate will not hang around forever. Get over to AndrewandTodd.com. Get started today. Let me also remind you at the top of HughHewitt.com, food for the poor. Your almsgiving in Lent is part of any Christian observance. The best way to do it, the very best way to do it, in my view. You can do it in the poor box at the back of your church, absolutely. But you can also do it online. If you want to serve the international community, do it through Food for the Poor. And Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I started on Ash Wednesday to do it. We will try and go back once a week to do that again. I think you ought to do, if you have the time, if you have the intentionality about it, you could actually make a donation via that website every single day for the 40 days of Lent, but at least do something, get started. They are so efficient. They are so terrific. They are so well respected. I've worked with them for years. They've been supporters of this show for years, and I've been supporters of Food for the Poor for years because they get it done. People like Tom and Lori try to go down to places like Guatemala, and they bring back firsthand accounts of just how effective Food for the Poor is. Please be generous. Finally, ReliefFactor.com. It's the weekend. There it is, Relief Factor. Go back into your house. You've got weekend plans. You're looking forward to getting out there on the road. You're going to run up and down the path. You're going to bicycle 100 miles. Whatever it is you're going to do, go swim 2 miles. Whatever you're going to do. Maybe you're just going to go for a walk. Maybe it's the first day of, maybe you started a Lenten observance of praying when you walk. Whatever it is. Get your ReliefFactor.com so you feel better doing support for the temporary relief of the minor aches and pains that plague anyone who's getting older, and that's everybody who's listening, and those who are weekend warriors, and those who have terrible commutes. I remind you about it 3 times in every single morning. This is one of those times. Turn around, go back in, get your ReliefFactor.com. Then come back. Last segment of today, David Cortman is going to bring us up to speed on one of the most important religious liberty cases. The Alliance Defending Freedom will no doubt be filing in the Philadelphia case of Catholic Charities. They wish to run their own foster care program, and they ought to be allowed to do so. Stay tuned, America. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Coming up, Dr. Larry Arnn, Murnen and Dr. Wilfred McClay in the Hillsale Dialogue. But look, in the middle of the coronavirus, looks like the panic is easing off in the United States, financial markets, and we'll cover it completely. There's been a lot of news that hasn't been covered. One of the things that happened this week is the United States Supreme Court agreed to hear a case which I believe may lead to the overruling of the worst decision of Antonin Scalia's career, Employment Division versus Smith. I'm not sure if David Cortman, who's senior counsel and vice president of litigation for Alliance Defending Freedom, agrees with me, but I asked him on to talk about it. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
It is great to talk to me about this case, the grant of cert, and what ADF is going to be doing in response to it, and what you think it's reasonable to hope for.
Well, there's several cases were granted, but what's interesting here is there's several that propose what you talked about. Is there's the Smith case and Justice Scalia who did a lot for religious freedom, but in this one case, he basically said, "Look, we watered down the pre-exercise clause's protection. In years, people are trying to get that protection back up again. So it's before the court directly for the first time. I'll be interested. I don't know how far the court will go, but what I am comfortable with is I think they're on a move to restore that protection, so people of faith can't be discriminated against in various programs and opportunities, and I think it's going to end up being a pretty good result.
This particular case involves Philadelphia Catholic Charities, which does not and will not be awarded any money from the city of Philadelphia because they refuse to place foster kids in LGBTQ homes as a result of Catholic doctrine. As a result, fewer kids end up in foster homes. That's what the bottom line is of the city of Philadelphia trying to make the Roman Catholic Church adhere to their guidelines. It is a rank interference with the free exercise of the Catholic Church, David Cortman. It's not even questionable in my view.
It is, and what's interesting is ADF also have several cases in New York and Michigan dealing with the same exact thing. And what's interesting, we hear so much about, this is about the children. You want to have as many social services opportunities, you want to have as many adoptive parents, and what this does is it limits the pool because it says to people of faith, even though you're perfectly fit to have children in your home, we're going to exclude you from this process, and therefore the 400,000 children who are waiting for homes have less opportunities. It's just pure discrimination against people of faith.
Because people of faith believe marriage exists between one man and one woman, and that they make the ideal, as designed by God, family for children who need parents to come into. Now, people can disagree with that, and I understand that they do. And I know I actually happen to know a bunch of LGBTQ parents who are perfectly great parents. But religious organizations that have as a part of their faith should not be discriminated against. Is that principle involved in any of the other cases that the cert has been granted for, and you're arguing this year, David Cortman of Alliance Defending Freedom?
Well, there's several opportunities. There's different employment cases and free exercise cases. We have Arlene's Flowers. We've talked about that many times. We're asking for the court to review that again. That's the same type of discrimination against people of faith. And I think what's important is what you mentioned. And then when these religious organizations participate, there is usually in these states over 100 organizations. No one is excluded, no matter what type of family you are, no matter what your status is. No one's excluded. The question is, can these organizations live according to their faith, and should they be excluded because of it? And I think the simple answer is no.
Yeah, and the way I illustrate this to my con law class is if you are an Orthodox, Hasidim, very ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, and you want to take in foster children from ultra-Orthodox Hasidim who have been unfortunately orphaned or found themselves with parents who can't take care of them, but you want only those children to live in that way, it seems to me perfectly rational, David. The framers would never have objected to that.
Well, even going a step further, when you are of a specific faith, people only want to deal with people who know what that faith is, who can talk about that faith. You talk about whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, it doesn't matter. But like Catholic Charities, for example, they go into the Catholic churches to try to get foster parents to say, hey, this is what the Lord would have us do. This is what the Bible says. They speak their language. They're the only folks they may work with. So if you take them out of the system, you're limiting not only the amount of kids that can be placed, but the amount of families able to adopt and foster.
It is just rank religious discrimination. You're going to be busy this year, David Cortman. How many times are you going to be up at the court?
We've got several pending. We're hoping to hear pretty soon, so we'll see.
All right, keep us posted. David Cortman from Alliance Defending Freedom. Follow Alliance Defending Freedom on Twitter. Make sure you support their excellent work. They represent everyone of every faith. Whenever that faith is discriminated against by the government, they're there to protect your First Amendment free exercise rights and to do so respectful of the prohibition on establishments of religion. They are fully invested in the first freedoms. Even in the middle of all this news, I'm so glad to have them on and make sure that people don't forget there are other long-standing issues. The market panic will pass indeed. The way I look at these numbers, it looks like it's passing today. Don't forget, if you're going to buy a house, do it this weekend. Go to andrewandtodd.com. The only winner. It's going to be like after the New York City blackout 9 months later, there were a little baby boom. There's going to be a month later from this coronavirus financial panic, there's going to be a home buying boom because, my goodness, people who were sitting on the sideline, or a refi boom, because you can get money out of your house like you've never done before, but you got to do it with andrewandtodd.com. Call up Gordon Wood if you're in Old Town, Alexandria, you're living near HQ2 for Amazon, or call Andrew and Todd wherever you're trying to buy a house, whether it's Gordon Wood in Virginia or whether you're buying in Seattle, wherever you are in L.A., call Andrew and Todd at 888-888-1172. Find a realtor in your area and get going, because at these rates, you don't want to get left behind. I'll be right back. The Hillsale Dialogue is next. Hi, Canada. Greetings to all the 400 affiliates listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show, wherever you may be around the globe, or if you're listening on the universe or at the podcast, or over at Hugh4Hillsdale.com. You know we are in the Hillsale Dialogue. Once a week we go high, and on Thanksgiving we spend 3 hours, or on New Year's Day we spend 3 hours with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and one of his colleagues. Today we're talking with two of his colleagues. Kyle Murnen is Director of Online Learning at Hillsdale College. He's responsible for those wonderful video courses, including a brand new one on Land of Hope, an invitation to the great American story. Land of Hope is the new American history textbook by our other guest, Dr. Wilfred McClay. Dr. McClay is the Distinguished Teaching Fellow at Hillsdale College, as well as the GT and Libby Blankenship Professor in the History of Liberty at the University of Oklahoma. This brand new book, Land of Hope, an invitation to the great American story, is a long overdue, much needed antidote to Howard Zinn. And the 25 lectures that Kyle has produced along with Dr. McClay are absolutely essential for people who want to know where we are, how we got here. And where we left off at the end of the second part of our three-part series on Land of Hope, Dr. McClay was with the death of Lincoln and the second inauguration. Then comes Reconstruction, a little-known, poorly understood period of time. Just tell us what we ought to know about Reconstruction, Dr. McClay.
Oh, well, it was really, I think at best you can say it was a partial job, that it was something where it's and there are so many different opinions about what could have made it better, including what probably would have been the best thing is if Lincoln had not been assassinated, and Lincoln's judicious hand would have guided the process of not just reintegrating the South, the dissident South, into the nation, but of reforming Southern institutions in a way that would not have been either so punitive as Reconstruction ended up being when Congress took over, or just casting the freedmen into the void with nothing but freedom, as Frederick Douglass said. So it was a social revolution needed to occur. We didn't really know how to go about it. And the war had become such a fierce matter with all that bloodshed that you mentioned, and the desire for vengeance that overrode the sentiments of Lincoln's wonderful second inaugural. It was, in retrospect, it was hard to see how it could have been anything but a mess, and yet good things came out of it. Problematic good things. One of the things my conservative friends have criticized me for is having nice things to say about the 14th Amendment, which we have a lot of reasons to, as you teach in your course, no doubt, a lot of reasons to be concerned about it, about the misuse of it.
14th Amendment left. The river of the 14th Amendment has gone flooded over its banks many times.
Right.
But the original 14th Amendment, and as understood in some respects, applying post the extension of the franchise to women, has been appropriately and inappropriately used by the courts. But during Reconstruction, the law was enforced at the edge of a bayonet. What happened when the bayonets were withdrawn after 1876?
Well, the election of 1876, of course, was one of the most, if not the most, corrupt and soiled presidential elections in our history, which had an indecisive outcome. And in the end, to cut through a whole lot of things, a political deal came out of it, that the Republicans were allowed to have the presidency, but at the cost of calling off Reconstruction. So the matter was really dropped in medias res in a lot of ways. The revolution that needed to occur in order to bring the natural rights philosophy of the Declaration into being made into a reality in the South was postponed. It was not negated, but it was postponed.
Dr. Arnn, the Confederacy retreated behind its wall because of the deal of 1876, infamous though it might be. They retreated and they erected de jure and de facto segregation, and it would take us another near century to get rid of at least de jure and often de facto segregation.
Well, that's the story of American history, isn't it? We start out with this standard, and the standard is thought by the founders to be perfect. I think it's so too. But of course, human affairs are not perfect. And the standard demands that we do things that we are not able or ready to do. And, integration, as say, a colorblind society, is a struggle. And it always has been. And the struggle, I should say, was corrupted by, not by, the 14th Amendment is a beautiful document. The courts didn't treat it right in the early going, in part to eliminate its, reduce its effectiveness.
Correct.
And then that has led to all kinds of distortion. I mean, the very great Clarence Thomas has pointed this out of late. We should go back and recover the clause that actually is supposed to cover Jim Crow privileges and immunities. But
to have prevented Jim Crow.
Yeah,
to have prevented
that's right.
it. Yeah.
And so the point is, that's and Lincoln's assassination, and Andrew Johnson was not a good president and not sympathetic to the cause. There's a really great meeting in 1863, if I remember right, where Lincoln meets with a bunch of black leaders. Frederick Douglass is not among them, but he was in contact with the ones who were. And he says, you're all free men. And he says, we got to figure out what to do after this war is over. And everywhere you go, the ban is upon you. And I don't know why you'd want to stay with us. And there's a country in Central America where we could set you up and you could have your own country. But you'd have to want to go. And they all sort of lower their heads, and then they go away and they talk and they come back a bit later, 2 or 3 days later, and they say, we want to stay here.
Yeah.
And so we're Americans, see. And Lincoln sends an order. If I remember right, it was Nathaniel Banks. It was the Governor General of Louisiana, the first seceding state to fall. And he says, they need to propose some way, to get back into the Union, of working themselves out of their old relation into their new relations, right? So that's sort of order that we're going to have to work this out. And before he can do much about that, Abraham Lincoln is shot. And, Grant, by the way, was a strong president to try to enforce the actual practice of political and civic equality in the South. But then, that it took a long time. And it's in my opinion, it's in the South where I come from. That's largely broken. My parents were in favor of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and all my aunts and uncles, in Arkansas, we're all cousins, so I have many of those. And I remember talk as a boy about all of that. I was 12, and I remember everybody talking about that. And they were, that's right. We got to do that. So that story, which still goes on, because of course it's, there's this identity group politics that dominates or is a powerful force in American politics, plays into that and presents the same problems on a new ground.
And so when we come to the end of Reconstruction, I just want to skip ahead a little bit here, Dr. McClay. Is it not amazing that America could recover from that war as quickly as it did?
Yeah, see, that's one of the things I think we need to draw back and emphasize is how extraordinary it is, and that we still have some maybe little suture marks remaining, but basically the degree to which we healed after this ferocious conflict is just amazing. And I think that fact ought to be honored. Even if the manner of knitting the nation together was not perfect.
Absolutely. We will do so after the break. Don't go anywhere, because it's actually miraculous. The Republic of Suffering, which Drew Faust-Gilpin, the former president of Harvard, is referred to, is what the United States was left with at the end of 1865. But it recovered, and boy, did it recover, and boy, did it grow, and it became a world power. We'll talk about that after the break. Go nowhere, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. Part 3 of a 3-part series of Hillsale Dialogues with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsale College. Kyle Murnen is the director of Arnn, and he is the technical genius behind maybe the best of the series. They're all great over at hillsdale.edu. This one, 25 lectures long, presented by Wilfred McClay, a distinguished teaching fellow at Hillsdale College and the GT and Libby Blankenship Professor of History of Liberty of the History of Liberty at the University of Oklahoma. 25 lectures long. Kyle, I know you told this in hour number 1. I want people who didn't hear that. You didn't set out to do 25 lectures, right?
No, we set out to do 15, but as you can see with this radio program, we had a lot of great ground to cover. We wanted to cover it all, so we extended it.
I don't even know how you got it done, but I'm glad, Dr. McClay, when they said to you 12 has become 25, that's kind of routine Hillsdale thing, isn't it?
I guess so. I think what Kyle's trying to say in his nice way is I'm kind of a bloviator, and that they couldn't stop me from just bloviating. So they had to, instead of editing it back, they just added segments. I'm going to be very interested to see how they do this because, like I say, I'm the actor who showed up and read his lines, and then the magicians had transformed it. So it'll be very interesting to see.
Dr. Arnn, I'm going to have you embarrassed. I'm going to have Dr. Arnn embarrass you, Dr. McClay. What makes a great teacher?
Let me just interject something about Kyle because we were making fun of him. Kyle fell into my clutches many years ago.
Poor man.
And when he was an undergraduate student, and, against his will, he's almost finished with his PhD, and against his will, he will finish it. And then he will be a fully operational Death Star, and then a lot of people are going to know all about him because he's going to be a great teacher. And about Wilfred, about Bill, what makes a great teacher is love and comprehension. You have to have the mind to put things together, and you have to love to do that, and then following on that is a love of explaining it. And the very best teachers, in my opinion, are also the very best minds, and even complex things become simpler in their hands. They don't become simple, but they become simpler. And that's like what a painter does. He shows you the essence of a scene because he can see it, and then he shows it to you. And that's what teachers do, and that's what Bill does.
And so you got to do that at length. And I'm curious, Dr. McClay, when you come to the period of time after Reconstruction has ended, up until the beginning of World War I, can you hold the audience's interest? Because it is simply an era of expansion, discovery, and growth. I can't even summarize how vibrant the country was then.
Yes, well, and it was all frightening too, because so much was changing so fast. The structure of the economy, the immigration. We look a certain amount of sentimentality at this is at the time of the Great Immigration, but in fact, it was people like Henry James were frightened by it. Henry James described coming back to New York, where 4 out of every 5 inhabitants was foreign-born, and saying, in effect, I don't recognize this place anymore. So there's a lot going on, and it's hard to hold it all in your head. And one of the things, by the way, that happens is that for much of the rest of American history, you have the markers of time are presidential terms, the succession of presidencies. That really stops after 1865, I would say, even though, of course, Grant's presidency, as Dr. Arnn's pointed out, has some very notable aspects. But who can recount the American presidencies from Rutherford B. Hayes to McKinley? Very few people. Politics was not as important as business, as expansion, as the changing texture of social life. And we begin to have a real literature, national literature that draws upon these realities.
And a national communications infrastructure. When we come back, we'll talk about, though, the bump that it continues to erode, the progressive era. Because when it gets going and when the authoritarian in the White House, the real one, Woodrow Wilson, takes up the cudgels of World War I, it gets out of hand. We'll talk about that, the Great War and its aftermath, and then get to the New Deal. All of that coming up. Don't go anywhere, America. The Hillsale Dialogue rolls along. conversation about the brand new book by Dr. Wilfred McClay, Land of Hope. Actually, Dr. Arnn, I'm going to turn to you. What is it that brought us the tragedy of the Progressive Era? Where did it come from? I know there's an entire online course at Hillsale EDU that Carl Murnen has put together about the Progressive Era, but what do you attribute its rise to?
Well, it's utopian hope and the ground that was laid for that hope in the success of America. It's different in Britain. Britain finally adopted socialism. You know, they had an aristocratic background. They had a working class, not more than a middle class. And then they had those disastrous wars that beat them up. And that's how socialism advanced in Britain. Here, it was, you know, we can fix everything and we can keep on like we are at the same time. And they were, you know, Woodrow Wilson, and then later especially the great master of all this, Franklin Roosevelt. They articulated their hopes and their claims in the language of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Wilson was an enemy of the Constitution in his academic works, not in his speeches. And so they adapted themselves to America. And this is my opinion, by the way, and I'm just saying a huge bunch of stuff about a big story, and Bill may have a different idea about it. But my thought is that, you know, we think we can do anything, and we almost can, but if you go over the next step to we can do anything, then all of a sudden we think we're God.
And Dr. McClay, John Dewey and the founders of the Johns Hopkins, the whole gang that lead to Wilson, they really did believe they had history on their side.
Yeah, they believed history could be a science. They believed that expert knowledge could substitute for the messiness of democratic institutions by, creating what we now call the administrative state. It's a direct result of that way of thinking about governance. And by the way, since we talked about self-rule, it's a negation of the concept of self-rule. The answer to the question, who are you going to believe, me or your lion eyes, is me, the expert, not your lion eyes as a citizen who has a right to make his own judgments about what's going on and what is best for you and for your society. So it's fundamentally anti-democratic, even though it speaks in democratic accents.
Now, when we're talking
of the principles of self-rule,
when we're talking for the first time, we are in the middle of the first month of the coronavirus. I hope it's the last month. I hope it's not the influenza of 1918 come again. But we don't know. When this replays in Thanksgiving's future, we'll know what happened with the Wuhan coronavirus and whether it was contained and cured and not but a road bump, or if it was a 1918 disaster. But we don't know now. We do know that Wilson didn't do anything about it. The great authoritarian in the White House, the great progressive, wouldn't even mention it because he'd gone to war and he had to beat the Kaiser and he didn't want the home front to be in any way unsettled. That grabbing of power by the executive was never relinquished, Dr. McClay. The executive continued to grow the federal government.
It's not a coincidence that Woodrow Wilson was the first person to conceive of and execute a strategy to propagandize the American people, to propagandize them. Maybe you could argue for a good cause, that is to support a war that in which the American presence was necessary to sort of resolve it in a good way, the First World War, but that didn't involve national interest in a way that was compelling to many Americans. But then it carried over into a kind of demonization of the Germans and all sorts of falsehoods, including the deportation of people who opposed the war and or imprisonment. And it's not a coincidence that the man who is sort of one of the great liberal icons, Woodrow Wilson, a great progressive icon, is the one from whom this first originates.
And the authoritarian in the White House. And Larry Arnn, whenever people attack Trump or any center-right conservative as having authoritarian inclination. I just laugh. They have no idea the way that Wilson acted.
Yeah, and I made mention of Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt was a much more skillful man at rule than Wilson was. Wilson was a bludgeon. And, Wilson goes over to you should read Winston Churchill on Woodrow Wilson at the Conference of Versailles that signed the treaty that ended the First World War. And he just was wrong about everything. And he imposed his will, and he kept saying he was going to appeal over the heads of the old world leaders. And all of those leaders had just been through elections at the end of the war, and he had not. And then he got back, and he couldn't get his piece through. He was, in the end, he was transformative in the way the executive was thought about and in the power that he seized, but he was a failure in the way he used it.
Now let's talk about the man who comes next, because we're running low on time. There is a lot of time between 1918 and 1929, Dr. McClay, and the United States enjoys it, but the reckoning comes due, the bill comes due, the war comes. FDR. Yeah. How do you deal with FDR? Because he's a sainted figure, and he certainly is a significant figure, and he's not without his great virtues, and he's not without his great flaws. How do you deal with it in Land of Hope?
Well, I try to deal with both of those things. I mean, I think my attitude is, to the degree possible, the same attitude that Ronald Reagan had towards Roosevelt, which was that it would be a mistake, I think, to simply try to negate his effects, because he was a great leader. He was an inspirational leader. And I'm somebody who gives a lot of weight. Remember, Land of Hope. I give a lot of weight to inspiration, to the spiritual qualities of great statesmanship. And but as a policy person, and I have a quotation from Raymond Moley, who was one of his closest early advisors. Roosevelt, he didn't have any ideas. He didn't read a book. He was not an intellectual, and it's certainly true. There's an incoherent quality to the New Deal. And maybe we should be thankful for that, because if Tugwell or some of the others who were much more hard left had prevailed more than they did, we would have had a much harder time making bringing the New Deal under control to the extent that we have. But,
luckily,
it's a very mixed bag, and I try to present it that way.
It was not scientific. It was not thoroughly carried out. It has been thoroughly carried out in recent years. But then comes the war, and what you call the finest hour in Lecture 19 of the Hillsale lecture series about your book. How do you sum that up for the audience? I mean, the finest hour is a British phrase, right? But we have one, too.
Yes, it is a Churchillian phrase from one of the greatest speeches ever given at a moment of, supreme peril. I wanted to, for those who could hear the echo of it, I wanted to echo that. I didn't want to segment off the American triumph, the American role in this great triumph from, the Anglo-American relationship. So that was actually deliberate on my part.
Oh, interesting. Larry, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, that's, of course, Winston Churchill was a very great man. And I've lately had a long argument with Conrad Black about whether Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill were who was greater, and I am astonished that he holds the view that it was Roosevelt. But he's a very serious man himself. No, Churchill, the partnership that we had there, historians mostly write about the strains. It was the most effective thing ever, and it won that war. And and then in our dealings with the Soviet Union, they became a great power and aggressive and an incredible menace that lasted a lot longer than Hitler. And shortly after Roosevelt, Harry Truman turned our policy around on a dime, and we joined with them and other allies, and we resisted them. So, and the national effort involved in that. I mean, one of the great things about it, I like Wilfred's title, one of the great things about it is the way our Army fought. Because we fought like free people, and that meant we were adaptable and we were quick. And in the early battles, we fought terribly, But pretty soon we were very formidable, and the Germans found us so. And that was a great national effort that was effective and cured the world of a menace.
So after the war, I'm advancing us very quickly. America wins. America demobilizes like it always does, Dr. McClay. And what happens in America?
Well, you have a lot of economic problems that bedevil the Truman administration. By the way, can I say a word about Truman? Because I think Truman is an unjustly neglected figure in conventional accounts. This is a man who was came from a very provincial background. You know, he really came up through a political machine in his native state. He had only a high school education, and yet he was a reader of history, of Tacitus and other great, he wasn't a reader of, the equivalent of David McCullough in his day. He read Tacitus and really used history in the way he thought about things. And this man, who everyone underestimated, helped to create the post-war order that now is under stress, but that lasted and kept the peace of the world for a long time.
And he was a common man. What a great point on which to end that segment. We'll be right back. America, don't go anywhere. The Hillsale Dialogue continues, part 3 of 3 parts on Land of Hope. Land of Hope also means land of great supply. We have been blessed in this country, but a lot of people haven't in this land. I'm asking you to go to HughHewitt.com and give to Food for the Poor. The button is at the very top. That is an almsgiving effort. That means you're giving money to the poor, particularly here, Guatemalans, who our friend Tom Tradup went and saw. These Guatemalans remain hopeful and generous. As Lori Tradup, Tom's wonderful wife from Dallas, learned this month on a mission with Food for the Poor.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway was the hospitality that was shown to us. The very first person I met was a woman named Josephina who kind of served as a host in the community. And she instantly took hold of my hand and my elbow. I think she was really worried I wasn't going to be able to make it down that rocky path. And she walked me down to meet her neighbor. She was kind of a touch point within the community. She just kept being nearby and smiling and hugging and being so warm. And she and her children were dispensing chairs out for each of us to sit in. And just to think about, in their little, they were giving to us. And it just made me realize that in our much, we can do more.
We can do more. And Lori and Tom, we give Tom a hard time on the show because he is our resident curmudgeon. Lori is a saint, by the way. But they went down there and they have produced for us these amazing testimonials. Please be generous to Food for the Poor this Friday and this entire weekend. HughHewitt.com at the very top of the page. You'll find the way to do it. You can call 800-951. You can call 855-359-4673. 855-359-4673. Or find the banner at HughHewitt.com. Don't forget your ReliefFactor.com as well before you come back for the next segment of the Hugh Hewitt Hillsale Dialogue. Go get your Relief Factor out of the cupboard. I'm holding up on the Univision. If you're watching on Hugh, that's the back. There it is. Support for the temporary relief of minor aches and pains. Get your Icarian, Curcumin, Resveratrol, Omega. Then go to ReliefFactor.com and get your supply of it. All right? 3-week starter pack is $19.95. ReliefFactor.com. ReliefFactor.com. Come back for Land of Hope, the conclusion on Hillsale's Dialogue with Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Final segment of 3 Hillsale Dialogue series on the brand new video series, Land of Hope, put together by Dr. Wilfred McClay, who's the distinguished lecturer at Hillsdale College, and Dr. Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale College, and Kyle Murnen, the director of online learning there, who has been praised more probably in the last 3 segments of the Hillsdale Dialogue than he's used to and ought not to get used to. But it's a great, significant accomplishment. I want everyone to please go and watch these lectures. But I want to conclude with where we are, because Dr. McClay, you study American history, you've written Land of Hope. Dr. Arnn, you study American history, you teach people. Kyle, you watch them do it. Where are we right now in this unfolding story? Where do you think we are, Dr. McClay?
Well, the way I end the book, and it's partly because I'm really wary of getting too close to the present. So people who want to, get a blow-by-blow account of the, of the Trump administration, Obama administration, the Clinton impeachment, whatever, are going to be a little disappointed. I do touch on all these things, but very briefly. What I tried in the last chapter to do is to set the table in terms of thinking a bigger picture. That is, the post-Cold War America. To fight and persevere and win the Cold War, we had to we didn't entirely demobilize. We never did in the way we had before. We took on the burden of world leadership in a way that we had always sought not to do in the past. And now, in the wake of the Cold War, and I mean, the Cold War didn't end yesterday, but I mean, I think we're still struggling with what our role in the world should be, whether we need the kinds of national security institutions that we have, whether we need to have the extent of a standing army that we have, which is something that the founders would have abhorred. And there's much that we have been constrained to do, some of it, I think, necessary, some of it not, some of it a result of the progressivism that you were talking about. That we were at a moment now where I think we're in a very clumsy, awkward way, which is the way democracies do things. We're rethinking all this. So that's what I try to leave the reader with, is the sense that there's a lot of questions about how we go forward that are open to us. Do we go back to John Quincy Adams' famous admonition that America does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy? And how far down that road can we go? Can we responsibly go? So that's part of where I think we are. I want to make a point just to really bring us up to the very moment, or at least to the 31st of the last month, Brexit. There's a way in which the crisis of the European Union, and to some extent the election of Donald Trump too, but to concentrate on Brexit, this is a revolt against the reign of expertise, and it is a vote in favor of self-rule. If we think of that polarity, that bump that you described a little while ago in the progressive era, if we think of that polarity as being one of the defining factors of the world we're in now, I think that self-rule is reasserting itself. To what end, we don't know yet. And a lot of people are afraid of this. They think that nationalism is a term they prefer to use, is a bad thing. Well, I can sort of agree with that in some ways, but I also think patriotism, and this takes us back to the very beginning of our discussion, that patriotism is a necessary thing. It's necessary for the health of a society. It's necessary for the health of the individual person. We need that. We need that sense of loving connection to our land and to our fellow men, our fellow citizens. So that's where I try to leave it, and with a whole discussion in the very last chapter of what American citizenship is about.
What a great object. I go back to our first segment where civics is about forming people, and that is an objective, Dr. Arnn, I know you have been about in your long tenure at Hillsdale College. On a very serious note, it's the highest goal of a good college.
Yeah. If, free inquiry requires free government, and our college has always been attached to that. And where we are today, I agree with everything Dr. McClay said, where we are today is we're in a great national debate. It's been going on for a long time, but it's intense now, maybe coming to a head, about what we are and how we're to be governed. And the alternatives are mutually exclusive. And we're fighting our way through that. And one of the things I notice, for example, is that the government is much more intense now, except it's pulling back in this current administration, on saying what is to be taught and precisely what is to be taught in the classroom. And it's not lessons about our past in the spirit or in the meaning of Land of Hope by Bill McClay. It's a new understanding that all in the past is soiled, and we've got to repair all that. And so that nothing better indicates the nature of the battle than that. And so, Bill, I should say, has done an extraordinary service. And I guess his whole life got him ready to do this, and darned if he didn't deliver it.
And deliver it, and Kyle Murnen has helped deliver it in a different form. Land of Hope available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the 25-part lecture series available at hillsale.edu. Thank you, Dr. McClay. Thank you, Dr. Arnn. Thank you, Kyle Murnen. Thanks all of you for listening. Adam and Ben and Generalissimo. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.